if we're trying to be authentic, we're not. We're performing. Right? But if we try to stop pretending, if we try to take our mask off and share what's underneath, people experience us as authentic.
Welcome back to the Alchemy of Communication. Today I have Jason Diggs sitting with me. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, Morgan. Glad to be here.
Good to have you. Tell us, who are you in the way that you want to be seen by everybody?
Oh, I like this question. I saw some of your other podcasts, and I think of myself mainly as an artist. Like the first thing that really sparked me and opened me up was music. You know, there was just like these two guitarists who lived on the same block as me, and I met them, and like we became friends. And like this was like in middle school, and they were like, "Well, if you want to join the band, you got to buy a bass, Jason." So I became a bass player, and like the next 20 years of my life was like playing in coffee shops and bars and recording music. Poetry was really fascinating for me as a young man, and you know, I approach group facilitation as an art form. Like I think of myself primarily as a designer. Like, how do we have a pristine and structured experience that allows for as much freedom as possible? So I'm constantly looking at how do we both and the situation? How do we create the widest space possible, but have it meticulously designed at the same time? So
widest space. What does that mean? The widest space possible?
People can bring what they want. People can be authentic. People can have a playground or a gymnasium in which they get to co-create. You know?
So it's really inclusive of whatever they might be bringing.
Yeah, inclusion is one of my strongest values.
Say more about that. What does that look like for you?
Well, I grew up in a big family. So I have 5 brothers.
Wow.
And I grew up in a religious family. My uncle was a pastor, and it was like a full gospel kind of church. And yeah, it was almost like, have you ever heard this phrase, big tent? Like, how do we create a tent that's big enough for people who disagree or people who are different than the norm? And I don't know. I was taught to really pay attention to people on the fringes and really make people feel welcome. So for me, inclusion is really about how do we have a world that works for everyone, even despite the fact that we have different opinions about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, totally. How do you see that playing out in your groups that you facilitate?
You know, little ways, in the sense that like if someone is being introverted, like I do a lot to make sure that the introverts feel comfortable stepping forward. And, you know, I believe that, you know, circling and authentic relating and relational practice, like it must be done in a small group. Like as soon as you get, I once did a training with 36 people and it was too many. You know, and there was like 9 of us on staff and volunteers and like, you know, 27 participants. And it was like, I got to that place and I was like, this is too much. I have to pull back. You know, it has to be a small enough group for us to really make sure that the introverts feel comfortable speaking in front of the whole group. And so that's the way I think about it, is like, you know, I'll try to model the practice instead of giving people an answer or coaching them. Like sometimes I'll be like, tell me more. What do you think? You know?
Right. What number? I'm curious. Do you have a number that you like to set your things at as the max? Have you arrived at a sweet spot?
Well, you know, running a workshop company is not easy. So you're always kind of, economics is a factor. But if economics were not a factor, yeah, I would always do 12 or 14 people in 2 staff. Yeah. Like to keep it really intimate.
Yeah.
But normally 24 participants is like the max. That really works in my opinion.
24 feels pretty sizable. I just capped my circling evenings off at 15 max, and I'd been going as high as 20 or 24 before that. And I decided to make some less money for the sake of greater intimacy and cohesion. And kind
Mhm.
of like you were saying, I think also there's a comfort level that's palpable when there's just a somewhat smaller group and everyone feels less overwhelmed by the size and gets a feel for everyone who's present. So it's cool to hear that you kind of have a similar thought about not getting too big.
Mhm. What's the culture of your circling evenings? What are they like?
That's an interesting question. How do you define culture?
The feeling tone in the room, like the norms.
Let's see. I started doing it at a new venue this year. Previously, I was at a yoga studio in Berkeley, and now I'm at a place in San Francisco called The Center, which is more of a hub for.
Mhm.
There's more types of authentic relating events that happen there, whereas at the yoga studio, I was kind of the outlier. I'm getting people that have some experience with authentic relating and circling already, or at least have an idea of what it's about. I would say people generally show up really like friendly and warm and wanting to have a good time and wanting to create a good time for others. Whereas at the group I was having last year, it seemed like there was more of, I guess you could say, like a provocative energy. People were coming playfully, but edgy and like kind of purposely bringing what people call the heat or the spice and
Mhm.
pushing people to their edges and just being like radically authentic, kind of at whatever cost.
Yeah.
And I'm now finding that it's almost the polar opposite. And some of my evenings now, there's like things that happen here and there that can be tense or a little bit awkward. But by and large, it's almost like they're like so sweet. I'm like, I'm craving a little bit more of something that feels, I almost long to feel a little bit of that discomfort again.
Yeah. I love it. That's one of my favorite polarities right there. Like the sweetness and the acceptance, and the validation that is so healing for us, and then the spice and the authenticity on the other hand, that's like keeps people coming back. That's for sure.
We're kind of jumping all over, and I think that's probably okay.
Mhm.
How do you, I don't know, do you have like a recipe for kind of creating both of those where there is that sense of camaraderie and knowing we have each other's backs and we can also be kind of pushy and challenging?
Well, as a facilitator, it's like the possibilities and limitations of the group are in almost entirely determined by your energy and your like the attitude and the depth that you're bringing or the playfulness that you're bringing or whatever qualities that you're bringing to the space, is what people will model, especially over time. Like if you're building community through a weekly event or something like that. And
Right.
so, the recipe is me.
Totally.
It's just like, I have my particular tone and energy and way of being that I bring when I facilitate, um, which it's mostly influenced by my circling and authentic relating teachers. But I also studied the Diamond Approach, which is a transpersonal psychology school, which has a lot of depth work and a lot of like inquiry is the main practice of like really looking at and being specific about what's happening inside.
Mm.
So I try to like bring a lot of inquiry, and really get people to look at themselves and their patterns, through the exercises that I'm leading or the circling or whatever it is I'm leading.
That's a thing. Let me follow up with that. Getting people to look at their patterns. It's one thing to get someone to notice what's happening right now. How do you get people to notice if it runs deeper than just something that's happening now versus having the awareness of like, oh, this is a thing that I run, or this is revealing something deeper and maybe more ancient about me? Do you know what I mean?
Well, the default in circling and like the way my teachers taught me, it's always related. It's always a pattern. Like what what we're shining a light on right now is um, a key to your relational blind spots. Like that's really why circling was useful and why I think it appeals to so many people is like there's parts of myself that I could not see without the light of awareness of a group of people and like a skilled facilitator to actually shine the light in the right spot and the right angle and ask the right questions. So to answer your question more specifically, I'm assuming that it is a pattern And so like the way that I'm framing the questions, it like just is always offering the opportunity for the person to like really have that aha moment.
How do
We're
you
like,
frame the How do you frame the questions? What's coming up?
well, we're diving right into the deep end. This is fun.
Yeah, totally.
um, so I'm part of what I would call the integral circling lineage, right? That came out of the Integral Center in Boulder. It was a particular group of people that, and it's really what started the circling and authentic relating movement. Like a lot of the teachers were coming to Boulder and getting trained and then going back to Europe or back to Australia or wherever it was. And there was a whole teaching around the hologram that was the beginning of the very first workshop. We would call it, it was called Aletheia. And are you familiar with this word, Aletheia?
I have come across it, and I would love for you to say more about it.
Yeah, it's really, really fun teaching. So the river Lethe in Greek mythology was like the worst possible nightmare for the philosophers, right? The philosophers were really interested in wisdom and cultivating wisdom, and the river Lethe would make you forget who you are. So it was the river of forgetting. And the river of oblivion was what they called it. So Aletheia was the return from oblivion. So it was about remembering the truth of who you are. And so, one side of circling is like there's no fixing and changing or advising. There's nowhere to get. If there's anywhere to get, it's more right here, more in touch with what's happening, right? That whole thing is half of it, or one side of the paradox, but the other side is like we're actually looking for these aha moments where we wake up to the truth of who we are. And so as facilitators, we were taught to, in a sense, fish for those. And fishing is also a good metaphor because the point is not to catch fish, right? The point is to be outside and notice the temperature of the air on your skin and like go fishing with your buddy. It's a relational thing.
Right. It kind of is goal oriented and it's kind of not goal oriented too. Like if you go out and you didn't catch any fish, unless you're starving, you're going to still have had a good time. That's cool.
So there's a chapter in my book in the middle called Hologram. And it's really, in my opinion, the deepest part of the practice is like, I'm projecting myself out into the world. And in order to see myself in 3 dimensions, like I need feedback from other people. But I need feedback in a way that's like doesn't set off all my defenses and isn't too aggressive because otherwise I'll just shut down or run away or whatever my pattern is, right? It's like, can I create the conditions under which a human can receive feedback about their way of being, even if it's painful? That's not easy. You have to create a lot of acceptance to do that.
What are those conditions?
I mean, a community where authenticity is celebrated.
That's a good foundation.
That's a good foundation, yeah. But also the acceptance and patience and yeah.
There was a thing in your book that's coming to mind right now that had to do with creating a sense of safety via acceptance. That like you might be pointing to a thing within the person, but you're also letting them know that you accept them fundamentally for who they are as a person. And you kind of make that distinction. So it doesn't set off any alarms that people have around not belonging, right?
Yeah, that might have been in the conflict transformation teachings. So yeah, just in case anyone is new to my work, my book is called Conflict Equals Energy. Yeah, I've organized the whole authentic relating curriculum. It's very influenced by the circling curriculum as well. And, in 10 chapters as like a foundation. And then the last 2 chapters are on conflict transformation, which is basically an advanced way to apply all of these teachings. And so like letting the other person know who they are to you and what you value in the relationship and creating safety and creating validation is necessary to be able to deliver truth and have it be delivered in fertile ground, right? Yeah.
I think a lot of people skip over that part. They just go straight to the thing itself without creating that foundation that creates that sense of commonality before you go into the thing. You'd mentioned you love talking about the history of AR. Curious to hear you share some of the history from your perspective as well as how you found your way into it originally.
Hmm. Yeah, I found my way in because I was involved in the Integral community. So I was Ken Wilber's videographer for many years, and um,
Oh,
yeah, that was fun. I got to like create all these courses and film all these spiritual teachers and hang out with Ken Wilber and all these different luminaries for years. And yeah, in a lot of these big conferences, I was the guy was behind the sound table and setting up the microphones or setting up the video cameras. And then I was also like pouring over all of the content in the editing room and creating these video clips, which were going out onto the internet. And so, yeah, so Robert McNaughton started the Integral Center, right? And the Integral Center was not really about integral theory because Ken Wilber's work and integral theory, it's like this really heady, interesting thing. Like if you're into human development and you're into like how personal growth actually works and how it functions, like his maps are amazing, but they're quite complicated to wrap your mind around as well. Really, people who are coaches and therapists and psychologists and all that kind of thing are very into Ken's work because he really looks at the architecture of human transformation, right? But Robert, when he started the Integral Center, he was really wanting to make it a community center that was focused on circling, which was really a practical application. We didn't talk about the theory, but it seems to like be rocket fuel for people's growth. People would come in and they would do a couple of classes or they would take the first weekend workshop. And in a short amount of time, they were growing like crazy. And Decker was one of the main teachers back then, one of my main teachers. And he would always say this thing. He would say, you know, ironically, the thing that helps people grow the most is to accept them exactly as they are. Decker used to say this all the time. He would have stories around it, and I would like write it down in my notebook. So years later, I'm like researching, writing a book on this stuff, right? And I'm like, oh, that's called the paradoxical theory of change by Fritz Perls, which was invented in 1945. Fritz Perls was one of the founders of humanistic psychology. He was one of the or it might have been the early 50s or something like that. But he was like one of the early pioneers, like before the human potential movement happened. Like Fritz Perls was out there doing his work, creating humanistic psychology. And so the paradoxical theory of change is also a reformation of what they called the backward step in Zen. It basically means in order to grow, you have to plant, right? In order to develop or move forward, you have to stay where you are and be where you are fully. That's why when I wanted to write a book around this curriculum, I started with polarity. I started with paradox because everything comes back to, I guess, the earliest modern formation of what we're talking about is Fritz Perls, the paradoxical theory of change, because he really just taught this thing to therapists, which was a new thing. Hey, don't try to fix or change or advise your clients. Right. And this was, the late 40s. But then there's, Gestalt psychology, the idea of wholeness. The word Gestalt means wholeness in German. And it's, that was central, and nonviolent communication. Really, circling and authentic relating is a peer-to-peer practice where it takes out the hierarchy of therapist and patient and just levels the playing field. But 90% of the teachings are all right there in Gestalt psychology if you look at it. And so there was a group of people starting about 20 years ago in San Francisco who were, they were all doing Landmark. Guy Sangstock was one of the original teachers creating Arete, and they were all incubating this, group of like 20 to 25 people in community, living in homes together, starting these game nights where people could bring the edginess. And it was a small underground thing that eventually moved to Boulder. And from Boulder, it really mixed in with the integral theory and Ken Wilber's work a lot. Like pretty much 90% of the authentic relating and circling teachers, like myself, the second generation teachers who really spread this work, like myself and Sarah Ness and all these people, the Circling Europe guys, they were all very steeped in integral theory and Ken Wilber's work. We were just not teaching that or rehashing that. We were looking at circling and authentic relating as an application of this transformative content.
How to take something that was maybe kind of cerebral and make it more practical and grounded. There's so much info about Ken Wilber out there. I'm imagining there's probably going to be some people listening who don't know him or don't know his work. If you could even just like offer like a brief synopsis of some of his core ideas or some of the things that have even stuck with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he really synthesized Eastern spirituality with Western psychology. So he looked at all of the developmental theorists in Western psychology that looked at, how do children develop? What's the theory of the unconscious? Freud and Jung. And he was this really interesting guy who published his first book at like age 22 or something like that. But he read like 10,000 books on psychology and spirituality. So he took all of Western psychology and he mapped it to Eastern spirituality. So Hinduism, Buddhism, Sufism, like all of these different spiritual traditions, if you look at the detail of it, they all had a model of transformation. They all had a model of human development, of how we form an ego and how our ego operates in the world, and then how it slowly becomes transparent to the divine impulse. We start to have these more spiritual experiences or expanded experiences of what it means to be human. And we continue to grow and develop beyond the ego. That's what the word transpersonal means. So the entire field of transpersonal psychology, in a lot of ways came out of Ken Wilber's work. Like he's the main theorist of transpersonal psychology. But that's what he did. He took everything he could about what we know of what it means to be human, philosophy, psychology, spirituality, and he created a system around that, which he calls, quadrants, levels, lines. The details are not important, but he had these really interesting teachings. Like one of them is the pre-trans fallacy, which basically means that, hey, if you have this conventional belief, like this more traditional, like traditional roles of men and women, like we can take this as an example. Well, post-conventional and pre-conventional look similar. And so we can actually mistake them. And so in the course of our development, if we're trying to develop beyond the conventional norms, there's all these pitfalls and landmines where we can actually be behaving and justifying behavior that's pre-conventional, thinking that we're all that, thinking that we're spiritual. Spiritual bypassing is another term for this, but he actually created the theory around it that he called the pre-trans fallacy. And that's just one of dozens of different teachings and distinctions that he brought forward.
Another that's coming to mind, I know that phrase transcend and include, right?
Mm-hmm.
How would you explain that?
I almost want to ask you, how would you explain it?
All right. I don't think I'm nearly as steeped in his work as you are, but it's the notion that in hierarchies exist, they're a part of nature. And anytime you go up a level in whatever hierarchy you're talking about, whether it's a system or your mind or whatever, that the next level is always comprised of all the levels that came before it.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the one hand, you're ascending in some kind of linear fashion. And at the same time, you're not leaving behind. You're including everything which came before it. Mm-hmm. So kind of like you were just getting at a second ago with traditional masculine, feminine, we might be getting to a new place with masculine, feminine roles in society. And yet that's also going to include not just where we started out and not just what was a response to that, but it's a new synthesis of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons this is important is because a lot of times to grow beyond something, we need to reject it. If you think of teenagers, it's like they need to reject their family in some way to individuate, and to figure out who they are socially. But then, transcending and including is like, well, if we're going to grow at all, we end up like rejecting things. And it's like to circle back around and include it. And that's what healthy development would be, is like, someone who's somewhere between, age 23 and 28, you like reintegrate a lot of your family values and figure out which ones you're keeping, and you can honor, your caregivers or parents and your authority. And someone who doesn't do that ends up with a lifetime of, problems with authority. because all teenagers have problems with authority, but that's actually natural for that stage of development, right?
Right. It's like you need to have the problem with authority to then learn to cultivate whatever healthy integrated relationship with authority looks like, both so you can respect it when it's above you, as well as not run the risk of becoming dictatorial when you have it, I suppose. How have these concepts influenced both your relational practices and your own life?
That's a broad question.
Yeah, totally. Maybe like start with just like your own personal relationships. A lot of these things can be kind of heady and abstract. I'm curious, have they made palpable differences in how you relate to the people in your life, your close ones, yours?
Absolutely. I mean, my closest relationships are people that I can, be in silence with, even if that's just in nature where we're taking a walk and we can have, silence for 8 minutes before we like come back into conversation. So my closest relationships are people who really understand presence and really understand how emotional support happens, who really understand the realm of the heart, but they're not scared of the intellect. They're not anti-intellectual, because I think there's a lot of anti-intellectual streak in our society that really makes me nervous, because we need to have good ways of thinking about our communities and being critical in order to grow and have functional communities and societies. So I tend to gravitate towards people who really want to play in all these different dimensions, whether that's the artistic, the pure presence, nature immersion, the intellectual, and giving and receiving emotional support, I think, is a fundamental part of human relationship. So, yeah.
I like that. There's like the domains you named, and how it's almost like you're not going to be fulfilled unless someone's able to hang out with you in each of those, at least to some extent. I noticed a minute ago, you were afraid of the anti-intellectual streak in our society. Tell me about that.
I mean, the dumbing down of politics, the dumbing down of, activism. Yeah, I think we really used to celebrate excellence in the intellect for most of history. So I'll just make a caricature. So in the 60s, late 60s, there was this phrase, get out of your head and into your body, man. And I think that was the beginning of a cognitive error. Because I think a better way to say that is like, hey, put all that heady stuff on the shelf for a moment and make sure you're including somatics, right, and you're including the body.
So it's not an either or.
Yeah. And because even understanding that intellectualization is one of the primary defenses that we have against authenticity, against intimacy, against receiving feedback from others, right? If we don't have that cognitive understanding that, when I was studying the Diamond approach, we literally went through the top 11 ways that humans defend. So the ego has elaborate defenses. And guess what? If your defenses are active, you're not actually in authentic contact with another person.
Can we pause there? That sounds so interesting and juicy to me.
Mm-hmm.
If your defenses are active, you're not actually in authentic contact with another.
Yeah. I would say that, those moments in circling or authentic relating where we feel connection with another person, and there's like, I know that that we're having a quintessential human moment. Like there's something human that's happening here. it's because our defenses have relaxed enough. And it's like there's a human to human contact that's real and palpable and nourishing. And as soon as I have an experience of like, oh, how do I look? I got to project a certain thing to you to impress you. That's a defense, and it's like
it's a performance, but it's a performance based in a defense of some kind.
Yeah. Performance is, and the mask is like one of the main ways that we defend against intimacy and real human contact. But there are a dozen.
I've never come across that before. The diamond approach, that's what you said that's from. I know Guy Sangstock, who created circling, is into that as well. I've heard him mention it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you summarize it for me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so Almas is the writer, A.H. Almas, if you've seen his books. He grew up in Kuwait and moved to Berkeley when he was 19 years old to study physics. And so it has this Sufi element, this Middle Eastern element to it. But yeah, it's a transpersonal psychology mystery school. So they study all of this detailed information about how our ego forms, and we study the blocks to essence. So circling and authentic relating deals with authentic contact, that's what they call it in the diamond approach. It's also known as the pearl. And so the phony or the falsehood that we project, the image that we project to others, is the primary thing that prevents authentic contact. And so in the diamond approach, we would just have long hours of inquiry to actually look at the thing, look at the structure. So there's a psychic structure that I have that I can inquire into. And when I inquire into it with a peer who's also being present with me, it slowly dissolves. And then I have access to the essence. You know, this idea of non-duality is kind of this, I don't know, I don't think it's the best way to think about it, because we think of it as like this really high spiritual thing that, you know, yogis and meditators do. Non-duality basically just means we're already all the thing already. And if we can remove the blocks to our essential strength and our essential joy and authentic human contact, like if we actually inquire into those blocks, then we can experience those essential states, because that's who we are.
That's beautiful. Is that primarily something that happens relationally? Like a lot of spirituality is individualistic. It's like, you know, go do your practice on your own. And it sounds, from what I'm listening, it sounds like this is a practice that maybe can or even should occur through connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really interesting to be a part of, because it was much more relational. You know, a typical session, we'd meditate together for 20 minutes or half hour. And then there would be a teaching. And then we would do like an hour and a half of inquiry, where we were in groups of 3 or in groups of 2. And we would just take turns sharing and take turns hearing each other and take turns reflecting one another. And so it was much more relational than, you know, just going to the Zendo or, you know, going to a Vipassana retreat where you're meditating 12 hours a day, right? It was a lot more talking and a lot more seeing and being there for each other. But it also was a spiritual path. It is a spiritual path. And so it's primarily individualistic. Whereas circling and authentic relating, I think, is primarily communal, and it's somewhat secular. Like, you're not required to believe anything. It's not specifically a spiritual thing, although it can touch into spiritual places.
There's a concept that's been with me. I think it's both something I think about a lot, as well as it's something I've been hearing you talk about both in the interview and in your book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a moment ago, it was something like talking about the blocks that come up and also touching on our defenses and defensiveness. And this ties into a thing I think about a lot as it relates to, there's this word that gets thrown around a lot today, and the word is safety. And it's a complicated theme and topic, and it means different things to different people. And I guess I'm thinking about in relationships in general, and then also you and I are both group facilitators, to what extent, I mean, how do you relate to the theme of safety as it's kind of playing out in culture today? And then to what extent do you think it's like our responsibility to create the conditions of safety for another versus there's an adage some people have started using, safety is an inside job, and that it's your responsibility to create your own safety in whatever conditions you may find yourself in.
Yeah. Wow. I love this question. And it's complex territory for sure. I would say I'm going to take a slightly radical view. I'm going to say it's always the responsibility for the person with the most power in an organization or a system to create safety for others. And I think we're all longing for that. I could use the word masculine, but like we're all longing for someone who uses power ethically to guide us. And this is like, it's just rare because, humans are flawed and we have shadows. And like often the more powerful we get, the more we just like double down on our blind spots. And it doesn't go very well when we do that, right? And harm is created. And so I think if there's a leader who's going around and saying, well, safety is an inside job, they are potentially creating a place where abuse can happen, where people can be gaslighting. I think that's another a really weird term, but like if you're saying safety is an inside job to someone and you have more power than them in the room, like just say in the room, I think you're doing them a disservice. Because safety as an inside job is 50% of the teaching. It's half the polarity. Of course, safety is an inside job. Of course, we have to bring resilience. Brene Brown has this brilliant phrase around this. This is a brave space, not a safe space.
Right.
Right. But the other half of the teaching is that it's impossible for people to be authentic if their security is threatened. So like if my paycheck is under threat, I'm going to hide my truth 100% of the time. If I believe that I might get fired for saying something, I won't say it. And the only way to create a more authentic culture is for the leader to say, hey, there is safety here. Here's the structure. You can go to this person in HR and tell your truth, and you can do it anonymously. And like that is what creates a safe place. And there has to be safety for authenticity to occur. And so I'm using a workplace because I think the lines are more clear. Now in a workshop space, I think the same thing applies. Where is it safe for me to criticize the leadership? Is it safe for me to give feedback?
Meaning there's not going to be any real harm or negative fallout or consequence for your just even saying it.
Exactly. But there almost always is social consequences for what we say. So that's why it gets really complicated really fast.
I think the fear that I have, like here's an example. I'm a father, I'm raising a son. Mm-hmm. My kid always wants to stay home from school if he's had an argument with someone, another kid. And I'm trying to impress upon him, like, go confront the kid, speak what's on your mind and in your heart, tell them how what they said hit you, work through it together, cultivate those skills. And he's not there yet. And I love him. And that's fine. Maybe he gets there in his own way, on his own terms. As it relates to this discussion, relationships, group spaces, organizations, my fear is that when it's framed that it's the responsibility to create safety from the top down, how do you account for people who have such low thresholds for difficulty or for challenge without creating an environment where we're now pandering to them as opposed to inviting them to cultivate strength and resilience, etc.? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's where I think the definition of safety really comes into play. The people who are the most sensitive and the most traumatized or like prone to like being traumatized if someone uses a tone of voice with them that they don't like should not be the ones who are defining the word safety.
Right. And
Because
that often ends up happening. They say, I feel unsafe. And I'm like, well, why? And sometimes they can't even name something. And it turns out that they're just having an internal physiological response to something.
yeah,
And they conflate that with safety.
yeah,
Or they hear someone being kind of sly and mischievous, and that feels unsafe to them.
yeah.
And they now have the power to kind of stop the proceedings and get people to conform to their notions of safety.
Yeah, I don't want to get into political territory in this discussion, but our culture has a lot of really challenging dynamics occurring right now around us. Because we do need to take into account resiliency, which is a more conservative value, which is that children need to experience hardship to grow. They need to have independence. And if we coddle them all the time, their development is going to be hampered. But maybe it's just a cultural reaction because, if a kid doesn't get enough nurturance and love, they end up with really poor self-esteem, or if someone doesn't grow up in a safe environment, they end up with like fear that's like stuck in their body that they have to deal with for their whole lives.
And then to what extent is it up to us as leaders to meet them on their terms to help dissolve their blockages versus that's their work that they have to do? How do you hold that polarity?
Yeah, I used to ask really probing questions and like say edgy things when I was leading, often, 5 to 10 years ago. And I had to like pull back a little bit and like almost protect myself a little bit because I noticed that the culture of the communities were starting to change a little bit, and that became more dangerous in the sense that like I could often get projected upon as like you're saying this sly and mischievous one. Sometimes I'm just playful and I don't want to give a direct answer. Sometimes I'm withholding and trying to be playful and mischievous just because it's an aspect of my personality. And I believe that should be okay. I don't believe that's unsafe because my intention is really to create an environment of more engagement, to have people bring themselves forward more and actually give them less. I don't want to give answers as a leader. I want to create an interesting, engaging environment where people can, create their own growth, create their own value.
And even like, modeling, we're always modeling all the time. Ideally, you would be modeling for them a way to be playful and maybe even slightly mischievous in a way that's okay and still leads to more connection. But it sounds like maybe it wasn't going that way.
I mean, it was just an adjustment I made based on what I was seeing and feedback I was getting.
You touched on another theme that really interests me, which is we live in difficult cultural and political times. There's a lot of divisiveness amongst us all. How do you think that some of these authentic relating practices could maybe be the antidote to that?
Well, the first practice is to slow down, and there's kind of an advanced practice, which is like, even when I have a strong opinion about something, or even when I'm activated around something or passionate about something, to still keep my listening online, right? And so that's the polarity of dignity and humility. That's the main theme of my book, Conflict Equals Energy, is that even when we are activated, we have to have a specific process for making sure our listening doesn't close down. Because the more active our nervous system is, the more closed down our listening becomes. So it's like, if we can slow down this activation and keep our listening online. And, that's one of the things I do with groups is it's almost like mediation work, but not quite. It's just really just helping people hear each other when they feel strongly about something.
Helping them track how that activation is closing down their listening or empathy skills, and to maybe notice the sensation of the closing and then to willfully heighten the empathy, or is that how it goes?
Yeah. And it's just so sad how, I don't know if this is an objective truth, but my subjective truth is that politics have gotten way more like, there's way more like mudslinging, low blows, like much more vicious attacks than I remember 20 or 30 years ago, Like my dad was super into politics when I was growing up. So like 20 to 30 years ago, I was very plugged into the mainstream. And it almost seemed like, wow, these people are disagreeing in a respectful manner, like the presidential debates, between Bush and Gore and all these kinds of things 20 years ago. It's like it was almost like they were disagreeing in a respectful way and just putting forward ideas that they believed in and letting the American public choose. Like that's what the way it seemed. And now it just does not seem that way at all. Like what's been modeled is like completely ignoring what your opponent is saying and making a very caricature, like evil version of what they're saying and attacking that. And it's just, this is just happening over and over again. And I see this happening in the so-called conscious community when people get into conflict as well. It's like they project their shadow onto the other person and they attack that shadow, and they're not actually relating to the real person. So I don't know what the solution is. Like, it seems like with the rise of media and technology, it's like these practices are even more needed. So, I mean, I'm here and willing to be a part of the solution.
Yeah, same. I think that's where holding two realities comes into play. I can know how I think and feel and see things, and I don't close myself off to what's true for you. And I'm also careful not to write you off just because you have a different worldview or even inhabit a different world than I do. Easier said than done.
Right.
How's it going so far? Let's check in.
Yeah, this is fun.
Cool.
Yeah, I love when the dialogue gets like rich and dense, and I'm appreciating you and how you flow with these dialogues. Where do you want to go next?
Let's see. I was seeing on Facebook, you were leading a community in Hawaii over the winter?
Yeah, it was a really cool community experience. So because I've been leading trainings for over 10 years, I noticed this thing, which is like the workshop high, right? So bringing people together for 3 days or even for 6 months for a leadership training or something like that. And like there's this expansion that happens, and then we go back to our lives and there's a contraction, and people mostly integrate on their own. Like we can create these longer containers that have some integration. But I lived inside of workshop culture for nearly 20 years. Like it's been it's been a really big part of my life. And so I wanted to create something different, and it was a residency. So it was not a peak experience. I was doing a little bit of circling authentic relating on a weekly basis. We were checking in for 30 minutes each morning with each other, but mostly we were just living in community, and people could come. As long as they stayed for 2 weeks or more, they could just come, and I called it a residency. I had 17 people come throughout the winter, and I was on this eco village with 20 bedrooms. So that was really fun. I called it Tech Less, Create More. So there was a focus on like supporting one another to look at our relationship with technology, to do like a screen fast every weekend together, and then to also support people in support each other in our mission in the world. So that's the create more part. And yeah, it was an experiment into what I'm really longing for in the next phase of my life, which is not to just be a workshop facilitator, but I want to be in a community that is embedded in these practices, connected to land, and living it, not just a weekend workshop.
Something deeper and more long lasting.
Yep. So I went to Hawaii for like 4.5 months last winter, and I might go back this winter. I'm not sure. We'll see.
Amazing. I love Hawaii. Isn't it so healing there?
It's so amazing. It's so special.
What are some, I don't know, lessons or takeaways you got from the experience? Did it all go as planned? Were there any hiccups? Are there any kind of things that you got from it that you weren't anticipating?
Let me check in. Yeah, I think I can say this, even though it's a public dialogue. There was a lot of hiccups. There was a lot that did not go as planned, mainly because I only had like 1/3 or 1/4 of like the amount of power and control I would want to have over the project as a whole. So there was me and people who came through my program and my network. But then there was also rooms that were being rented out on Airbnb. A lot of cool people came through those things, but like those people were completely random. And then there was the staff who were living there and taking care of the land. And so there was these three different cultures happening. There was a lot of clunkiness in that. And I think circling and authentic relating is still like a niche. It's like people who are relationship junkies, they get into it, they get this like really interesting hit of growth through it, and they often go deep. People often take workshops from a bunch of different companies. Like they do this authentic relating thing and then this circling thing. And I love that about it because there's a lot of diverse offerings, a lot of people applying this work to different areas, mixing it with other modalities like breathwork or men's work or whatever it is. But the culture of it is not immediately apparent to people who haven't done the thing. It seems awkward and strange and like, why would you want to talk about your emotions that much?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think the awkwardness and strangeness is just by design, or is that something we can work with to make this more inviting to more people?
I think it's by design. I think intimacy is inherently confronting for people's egos because, and I don't mean like, you and I are vibing on each other or, like we think of intimacy as like love, but I don't mean that. I mean two people who are penetrating each other's souls. Like, I think this is inherently confronting to us because, our ego has all these defenses that we talked about before. And like, if you and I, let's say we took a road trip together and we just talked for like 4 or 5 hours straight, we would get to a place of intimacy and we would not be the same at the end of that conversation. We would be different people. And that process of like opening yourself to allow yourself to be transformed and changed by the other person is something that not everybody's into. And circling and authentic relating it just creates a much higher likelihood for that to happen.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I was in any kind of event, I was told to make eye contact with someone, and the facilitator is kind of narrating over this eye contact, which is something that we do, is like, just notice what happens for you. Notice, what's happening inside. Notice where your attention goes. Notice what your stories are about the other person. And like they'll narrate over this experience for like 2 or 3 minutes sometimes. And it's like you and I are just in the eye contact, right? Eyes are the window to the soul. And it like we don't have this verbalization to invoke our defenses. And so there's something happening. I remember the first time I did this, it was so uncomfortable. It was so awkward for me. Like I was projecting my own insecurity onto the other person. They must think this about me. I'm not good enough in this way,
All the ways you were predisposed to be insecure or perceive your own inadequacy.
Yeah.
You were imagining they were doing this to you.
Exactly.
And then what? Did you find out that they weren't?
Yeah, I stuck with it and I did it for a number of weeks and I started to enjoy it. But like the first couple of experiences were mostly uncomfortable. And so that's why I think people come towards this practice and then get bounced away often, It's kind of like the first, couple of times you sit down on a meditation cushion, it's probably going to be uncomfortable.
Is it like a litmus for who has the capacity for discomfort or a willingness to transcend it?
I think that's part of it. I think some people are in a lot of pain, so they're motivated to stick through the discomfort.
Or just sheer curiosity. What's on the other side of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some people are motivated more by aliveness and curiosity.
Aliveness. I love that. That's a thing I'm often looking for in my groups. What's your relationship to aliveness as far as like noticing, tracking, and even helping other people track that sense of aliveness?
Yeah, this was a fundamental part of the circling school that I grew up in. It's like tracking aliveness, even like, I'll use a funny word, like fluffing it. Like if there's aliveness happening in a circle, just to like give it a little zhuzh and like help the group follow it, because it infuses energy, right? And there's energy that's needed to penetrate the defenses and to like wake up to the truth of who we are and see through our relational blind spots. It takes a lot of energy. So a lot of what you're doing in a circle, what I'm doing is cultivating energy, is like trying to pack more and more presence and energy and aliveness into the experience.
How do you do that?
I don't know if it's something that I can teach verbally. Like I could show you, but most of what I'm doing is just modeling what I saw my teachers do.
I would assume it's a process, at least in part, of tracking what you're feeling within your own body. And then you're having a response to that. You're feeling lit up about it. And then that's then kind of having some ripple effect on those around you who are both tracking your experience as well as then kind of coming into contact with whatever that may be for them.
Yeah, including somatics. I learned through the diamond approach that the easiest way to find presence is to feel your arms and legs, right? To just like, if you practice feeling your arms and legs, it just activates more of your full brain, right? It activates more of the right brain and activates more of the hind brain. And if we do that at the same time as we keep our cognitive faculties sharp, it creates this field of presence. And so inquiry is, heart, head, gut. It's our body is online. We're tracking the aliveness and the somatics in our body. At the same time as we're allowing ourselves to be touched by other people, which is the heart. At the same time as we're bringing curiosity and really trying to penetrate with our intellect what's actually going on. What is the truth of what's happening?
And to bring all three to the table, I think that's a thing that happens is when someone's intellect is most engaged, they tend to disregard the other levels. I appreciate that reminder of staying here and staying here and staying all over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do I do that? I mean, how does one do that? Yeah, practice. It's like asking, how does one meditate?
Yeah. There's so many ways in, though. Meditation means so many things to so many people.
Mm.
I could be tracking my body. I could be cultivating absolute stillness or focus. I could just be focused on a mantra, or I could be cultivating virtues like kindness, compassion, and those are all meditation. Mm-hmm. Do you ever go to circling classes as a participant these days?
Mm-hmm.
What's different for you now?
I mean, sometimes it's hard for me to go as a student, but I have done some online things, through one of the organizations, and it's hard to just be Jason, because of my role in the industry. Like I created the first podcast on authentic relating and, co-founded one of the biggest companies that is doing this work and published a book. And there's a part of me that is like, I just want to be Jason sometimes. I just want to be a normal dude. And thankfully here in Boulder, like I don't teach in Boulder. I don't teach in my hometown. And like there's a community that's been going for every Sunday night for 14 years. It's called T Group. And I just get to be a normal person.
Yeah.
But that practice is different because it's very egalitarian. It's very, like there's no leader in T Group.
Right. The team, the ensemble, they're all co-leading together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there might be a facilitator who just brings us from one part of the evening to the next part of the evening. But once you're in the group and doing the practice, there's no leader. It's a leaderless version of relational practice, where it's just, you're there in a group with 3 to 6 people, and you're just being in the present moment for 45 minutes. But the community is really strong. There's a lot of strong practitioners. And so I get to just be me in those environments. Yeah. So you asked me what's different. I'm trying to answer your question directly. I think it's because I've had a particular role. It's really hard to leave that behind. It's really hard. It's almost an impediment for me to do the practice or be the practice or learn from others. But I'm pretty good at deconstructing role power. It's like a little hobby of mine.
Say more about that.
It's like when the workshop's over, like I just like refuse to let other people put me on a pedestal. Like I'll like fuck up and show them my shadow on purpose if they're doing it too much. But mostly I just like, yeah, I'm allergic to that. But during the workshop, this is the paradox. During the workshop, I'm holding the authority really strongly because I think that's what serves the student the most. And it's what channels the spirit of the thing the most. But then I try to put it down afterwards.
It's a tool, like a heuristic of some kind.
Yeah.
Part of my interest in asking that question, do you think there's like a plateau that people hit in these practices? Or is there always a way to keep plumbing new depths within yourself?
Oh, definitely a plateau. It's a practice. It's something that one can never master, you know? But the learning curve is like fast in the beginning, and then it's a plateau, a short plateau, and then it's fast again, then it's a medium-sized plateau, and then it's a little bump of growth, and then a longer plateau. I mean, I've been steeped in these practices for over 12 years. And so I don't know. I really like this dialogue. I really like how you're asking me questions and how you're holding yourself, and it feels really good.
Oh, good. Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're open to sharing, get personal, like, can you think of a personal plateau you've hit where you thought you were at a plateau and then it kind of started going up again and you saw something new in yourself?
Yeah, kind of related to what I was just talking about, like the whole idea that, oh, I'm experienced. At a certain point, like 8 years in, I am experienced, and I am an experienced practitioner. I'm someone who with a lot of skill. Like that self-concept began to be an impediment. It began to be like, it almost felt like a weight that I was dragging. And it started this long plateau that like literally lasted like 3 years, where I was really confused about like how to hold my role and like when to share my passion and confidence around a particular part of the teaching, and when to just like shut up and be myself and do the practice and let people have their own journey. Like, yeah.
And what began to shake that loose for you?
I started teaching a lot less. Like for a while, I was essentially leading 2 weekends a month, like 20 workshops a year for a little while, for maybe 3 years straight. And so what shook that loose is like, loss, grief. I stopped teaching for a little while, or I stopped teaching as much. Like I kind of went from doing 20 workshops a year to doing like 4 or 6 workshops a year, and yeah, that's where I've been for the past like 4 years, is like doing less, focusing more on myself. And so, yeah, what shook that loose is like, or what catalyzed it was pain. Something wasn't working anymore. Some persona I was trying to invoke wasn't. Sometimes it would like the light would turn on, and sometimes it just would flicker, and it was like wasn't there.
You came into contact with one of your own personas.
Yeah. One of my colleagues, when I was teaching at the Integral Center 10 years ago, had this really interesting model or idea or teaching. He said, what if there's no such thing as authenticity? And what we call authenticity is simply the action of removing a mask. It's like when I stop playing games with you, and stop this performative thing, stop trying to impress you and actually share something that's more human, you and I call that authenticity. But it's actually the action of removing. And then I think this is actually a much more useful definition of authenticity, because we realize that the mask, we can always take the mask off. It becomes a tool, it becomes an action rather than this thing that we have to model. Because if we're trying to be authentic, we're not. We're performing. Right? But if we try to stop pretending, if we try to take our mask off and share what's underneath, people experience us as authentic.
Is it just an endless series of masks, though? I'm imagining you remove one and then do we ever get to a truly maskless place?
I don't think so, because we live in the world, right? It's like ego defenses are really, really useful for living in society. It's like if our ego was defenseless, yeah, it would be, I don't think it would go very well for us. We'd either end up crucified or, yeah, penniless in a ditch, one or the other.
It's one reason I appreciate the containers that we create in these classes and workshops where people get glimpses into being able to do that in a way where they know they're not going to get crucified or end up in a ditch. Like I had a guy who came to my class recently for the first time. A lot of times this theme of performativity comes up where people come into contact with ways that they've been performative and haven't even known it until someone sees something in them, reflects back at them, and they're like, oh, I'm actually just saying that because I'm used to, or because I'm expecting that that's what you want from me. It's going to create this particular result. And this one guy was like, I don't even think I want to fully let go of the mask here, even though I can see it. And even though I'm coming into contact with you guys, because let's see if I can remember his quote. It was something like, why would I taste the candy when I can't actually ever live in the candy store?
Wow.
And so for him, it felt really sad to even remove the mask for a little bit, knowing that he was going to have to put it right back on again to function. That hit me really hard.
Right. I noticed a sense of hope, like just, the dozens or probably over 100 facilitators that are out there doing similar work, in their own hometown, how this really has rippled out.
Yeah, it's a movement. I appreciate that it's like even people like him, it's giving an opportunity to just come into contact with your own mask. And then whatever you may do in that moment of meeting it is up to you, and maybe something you need to decide if it suits you or not. But I think there aren't a lot of places and opportunities in life to even have that.
Yeah. Well, I think there is a lot of places and opportunities in life where you could do that, but very few that explicitly make that the thing that we're trying to cultivate. And I think that makes a big difference because, like if you go onto the basketball court, right, you better be playing basketball. In other words, you better be trying to like shoot the ball in the hoop. Because if you're going into the basketball court to try to like do something else, some other intention, it might not go well. And I think there's so many arenas in life where cultivating authenticity is really possible. I'm thinking of art and romance as two places where it's very like it really makes sense. It's really rewarded. Like artists and musicians that really put their own soul, their own creativity into it, and they're in touch with something, right? They're not copying their influences. They've been influenced, but they're actually mining their own soul and bringing something out. Similar in romance, like we're not doing the pickup lines. We're not like trying to impress the other person, although we are trying to romance them. We are trying to seduce them. We are trying to like, have this really interesting experience of somehow getting our needs met and, worshiping another person at the same time, and like trying to make another person happy at the same time as we're trying to create conditions under which we can be happy. Like these are realms of life where I think authenticity is really rewarded, and like it makes sense to cultivate them. But most of the other areas of life are really about accomplishment or social status, or like all these things where authenticity is a hindrance. Right. And so,
yeah, that's interesting. Art and romance are kind of two of the main areas where authenticity is valued. And like you were saying, in the beginning of relationships, obviously there's going to be wooing and putting your best foot forward. And then at a certain point, I think any relationship is going to fall flat and start to become dead if people aren't really actually being vulnerable and revealing themselves and starting to take those masks off.
yeah. But if we don't have a realm of life where we can actively study this and look at the mechanism of what authenticity is and how we can personally cultivate it, we might never know how to do that in a romance. We might end up in a lifeless marriage, you know? Yeah. And so I think what we're doing is inherently valuable and contributing, because hopefully that people can take that to other domains of life, and people will have careers where they can bring more of their authenticity forward. And
Maybe the last thing we'll touch on, speaking of career, some people are attempting to bring this into the workplace and organizations. And I've heard about mixed results. I think some people are open to it, and some work cultures, it just doesn't seem to fit in. They're like, what are we doing? And it almost seems antithetical to what they're trying to create with each other. What's your take on how all of this kind of fits in with more corporate systems, et cetera?
Yeah. I am one of those people. I even have a website called authenticatwork.org. And it's like, I developed a whole series of workshops to bring this into the business world. And I found it was at cross purposes with the business world. Maybe it's just that there's so much posturing, so much pretending, so much hiding. Like, people have to hide their flaws and shadows in order to be perceived as efficient and productive. People need to, for the most part, in corporate America, especially, but like also just the business world in general, for the most part, people need to be strategic and not tell the truth in order to get ahead. And so I think it is inherently at cross purposes. I don't think it works well. I think certain people have had success with it. Like, I do have one colleague who's an embedded trainer. Like, she has a salaried position in a large corporation, and she does teach all of these things, a lot of these things, a lot of the MVC concepts like owning your experience and other teachings. But she's already on the team with people. Whereas coming in as an outside consultant, you're essentially asking people to slow down and pay attention to something that might create more problems before it can actually create more, like, any good results. Like, things might actually slow down and get less efficient if businesses go down this road. So I think it is possible to do in smaller businesses, startup companies or nonprofits. I think I have worked with small teams quite a bit, or occasionally over the years, with a lot of success. People love it. Generally, they love it because they're in a business or a project that has 12 to 20 people involved, and they actually want to know their coworkers, and they actually don't have as much pressure. As soon as you get to be a certain size, it's like, if you get labeled as a troublemaker or put on a certain list, you can get fired when the next round of layoffs come around. Like, I don't think it works in those environments very well. You need so much buy-in. And this is a little bit more of a nuanced point, but I'm glad we're going here before we end. Like, as a facilitator, I can only do so much to bring the culture, because it's an energy that I'm bringing. You asked me earlier in this dialogue, like, how do you do it? And I said, well, I watched my teachers for hundreds of hours, and then I modeled what they were doing and put my own flavors into it. That's how I do it. So in order to train someone to do it, I would have to show them. I can't tell them, right? Because it is that complex. And usually, in order to transform a culture, I would need to go in with at least one other facilitator and have some inside people who get it to have any chance at transforming the culture. Like, I can't just go in as a one-off consultant and meet with a team once every 2 months. It just would never work. It is that different.
You're asking a lot for that kind of change to happen. And this kind of weaves back to an earlier theme of, are you interfacing with people who are ready for whatever those changes may entail?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. This has been so wonderful.
Yeah, it's been so great. I really like talking with you, and I really hope we get to hang out in person sometime, maybe even do a project together. It's always good to get to know other people in this industry, and really love what you're doing. I'm glad you're doing a podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I would love to work with you and hang out in person sometime.